Good morning. Welcome to St. Paul's Universalist Church on this Palm Sunday. In the way of announcements, we will be holding a Maundy Thursday service here, 6:30? Yeah, 6:30. I wrote the template of this like 2 weeks ago. 6:30 on, of course, Thursday. It's a short service of music and readings and, of course, a traditional serving of communion. In the way of other announcements, our church clerk, Pat, reminds us that it's not too early to think of newsletter information for the abbreviated version of our newsletter, which will cover our May services, but also June and July, which take place at our sister church in Salisbury. Also, if anyone would like to bring flowers or have someone buy one in memory or honor of someone, there's a sign-up sheet on the back table. And it was a couple weeks ago, we had Pledge Sunday. We are still accepting any pledges right on through the end of the church calendar, which will be the Sunday closest to Memorial Day. If you are interested and on the fence and want to come off the fence, please see Julie. Are there any other announcements? All right, let us proceed to our musical. Oh, you have one?
Yeah, I have a sorrow.
Oh,
We're not there yet.
yeah, we're not there yet.
Oh, that's fine.
That's okay.
Ignore me.
All right, let's proceed to our musical call to worship.
Rejoice, your joyful praises bring.
I open our service with the words of Daniel Chesney Cantner. Today we begin the walk to Jerusalem, the Holy Week. The demand that we face the broken path, the abuse of power. Today we walk toward the day spring breaking through, the Easter day of joy. So let us prepare the way. Let us join together this morning in worship to see what holiness resides within and about us, to welcome in the day, to make straight the path for the work of God. Let us worship together. Begin our service with the lighting of our chalice. As I do so, I invite you to join me in the words. We light this chalice for all who are here and all who are not, for all who have ever walked through our doors, for those who may yet find this spiritual home, and for those we can't even yet imagine. For each of us and for us all, may this flame burn warm and bright. Opening song is number 262. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine, thus to be covenant with one another and with our God.
Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes.
For our meditation today, I'd like to share this familiar passage from the Gospel according to Mark. When they were approaching Jerusalem, at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. We will now share a moment of silence where we listen to the wisdom of our hearts and minds. Is it just me, or as soon as I said moment of silence, we heard like a circular saw? Hey, we're talking about a carpenter today, so no worries. Anyway, our next song is number 263.
They cried, Hosanna on that day, while strewing cobs upon the path. But who was sighing away, and what the measure of his wrath?
On the Christian calendar, Palm Sunday represents the penultimate chapter of the story of Jesus' earthly ministry. According to the four Gospels of the New Testament, he enters the city of Jerusalem on a colt to cheering crowds prepared to welcome him as their Messiah. They lay down cloaks and palm branches in front of Jesus as he makes his way. There's a lot of symbolism here. Jerusalem, of course, was the holy city to the Jews. Palms represented victory. And a king arriving on a donkey, as opposed to a white horse, symbolized peace. But people expecting a military leader who would overthrow the occupying Romans would be disappointed. This Messiah was the leader of a different kind of kingdom, a spiritual one as opposed to an earthly one. We're all familiar with the stories of what happened in the days that followed. Jesus held the Last Supper, was betrayed by one of his own disciples. He was arrested. His other followers scattered. One denied knowing him. The same crowd that had cheered for this occasion later called for his execution, and the authorities obliged. To call it a reversal of fortune would be a huge understatement. The Gospels state that Jesus had a pretty good idea of what awaited him when he entered Jerusalem, yet he chose to do it anyway. It occurs to me that the Jesus a lot of us grew up with in Sunday school or church is largely inaccessible. He's placed so high up on a pedestal that he almost feels out of reach. For a man who has been so influential on human history, we know little about him beyond the New Testament accounts. Just little things. For one, no one called him Jesus. He would have been called Yeshua or Yeshua. Jesus is the Greek translation. It would be like you calling me, and I had to practice this, Zefri, which is the Greek translation of my name. We don't even know what Jesus actually looked like. Despite centuries of artwork to the contrary, it is highly unlikely that a first century Palestinian Jew was a Caucasian man with blue eyes. This image is probably more realistic, but we're just speculating. And appearances notwithstanding, clergy, philosophers, scholars, and everyday people have grappled for nearly 2,000 years to understand Jesus' teachings, including the meaning of his ministry leading up to what we call Palm Sunday and the tumultuous events that followed. In the 13th century, a priest by the name of Thomas à Kempis wrote a devotional book called Imitatio Christi, in English, The Imitation of Christ. This book was the inspiration for a hymn and movement in 1890s America. What would Jesus do? In the 1990s, the movement experienced a resurgence. You may or may not remember bracelets and t-shirts from, I can't believe, 30 years ago, with the expression WWJD ? An abbreviation, of course, for what would Jesus do? To get you thinking, how would Jesus handle whatever situation you find yourself in? I was raised Methodist and Presbyterian, pretty mainstream Methodist and Presbyterian. And over the years, I have had what I would call a complicated relationship with Jesus. It is part of what led me to this denomination. Anyway, as I was thinking about sermon topics for the Easter season, I got to thinking about WWJD, and this idea popped into my head. WWJRD. What would Jesus really do? If we went out on the street and asked people what Jesus' teachings were about, if people didn't immediately run the other way or say, not interested, please go away, we'd likely get a lot of people saying things such as, be loving, be kind, be caring that Jesus died for us, and so on. And while that is certainly part of the message, it seems to me that it goes deeper than that. Because Jesus did other things. One of the other Gospels said that Jesus did so many things that if you wrote it all down, it would fill all the books in the world. What else is there beyond what I call, for lack of a better term, Sunday school Jesus? And this is what I'd like to explore today. But first, a couple of disclosures. I do not claim to know the mind of Jesus of Nazareth. What I offer are perspectives, kind of different ways of looking at things that are there, but maybe, we don't always consider, that I've learned through my study of the Gospels and other sources. And you may agree or disagree with some of these. Jesus would not be a Christian. You're thinking, what are you, nuts? It's right in the name, Jesus Christ. But Jesus was born, raised, and died a Jew. He was an apocalyptic Jewish teacher. When he came to Jerusalem on a colt, he was there for the Jewish observance of Passover. The term Christian did not come into use until after his death. I've read that his followers originally called their spiritual practice, among other things, the Way. Christian came into use as more Gentiles were permitted to join the faith in the decades after the crucifixion. But even then, the term often had derogatory connotations, especially in terms of persecution under various Roman emperors. He would hang out with the wrong people and was not afraid to call out the so-called right ones. Jesus focused a lot of his ministry on the misfits and the outcasts of society, the poor, the sick, tax collectors, and sinners, for lack of a better term. He asked, where is there the greatest need for a physician, not among the healthy, but the sick? He frequently turned social convention on its ear. For example, Jesus steps in to save a woman who had been caught in adultery. The law called for her to be stoned to death. Jesus disperses the crowd by saying, let he who is without sin throw that first stone. Nobody can say they're without sin, so they disperse. He then asked the woman, where's Where's the crowd? Is there no one left to condemn you? And of course, the crowd is dispersed. And he does not condemn her either and sends her on her way. In John's gospel, Jesus reveals himself as the Messiah to a Samaritan woman, an outcast who had 5 husbands. She had had 5 husbands and was living with a man she was not married to at the time. The lowest of the low. A woman living multiple relationships, marriages, outside of marriage, and a Samaritan. It's hard for us in modern times to appreciate the disdain that the Jewish people had for Samaritans. And yet she is the one he chooses to speak to and share his true identity with. He heals lepers who are considered very unclean. Sometimes he dares to heal people on the Sabbath, which was forbidden. Jesus went out of his way to look out for those whose society turned away from. The people he had the harshest words for were the priests and scribes who were supposedly the most pious and holy, going so far as to call them, quote, a brood of vipers. And he pointed out the hypocrisy of their being so focused on the letter of the law that they had lost sight of the spirit of the law. And he would be misunderstood. In a culture where rank and status were important, Jesus emphasized humility. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first, he taught. When giving to others, he taught to do so in such a way that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. In other words, give generously, but don't make a show of it. His followers struggled with a lot of his teachings, and they still do, because we have a similar social order today. That hasn't gone away. Even Jesus' own family misunderstood him. The Gospels refer to Jesus having brothers and sisters. In one account, they get word of what he's doing and saying, and they think he's crazy. In another passage, he claims that his family are not his blood relatives, but rather those who follow his teachings. He wouldn't worry. He asked, who among you can add a single hour to their lives by worrying? He said that there was more to life than food and clothing, and pointed out that the birds don't go out and work, yet God still provides for them. So have a little faith and don't get all worked up. This is one that often gets forgotten. He would lose his temper. Think of him all peaceful and calm and having the right thing to say. But when he goes into the temple and sees merchants cashing in on people getting ready for the observance of Passover, he, as we would say today, loses it big time. Overturns their tables, beats them with a whip, casts them out. He's furious with them. And as you read your way through the Gospels, he sometimes gets frustrated with the behavior of his disciples. This whole idea of, there should be a pecking order here. I should be the top disciple. And it's like, no, that's not what it's about at all. And it's where, he rebuked them. And he could be pretty clever and sharp-tongued toward Pharisees when they would try to challenge him. He would take naps. Appreciate the value of rest. One day, he spends all day preaching and healing, skips dinner, and goes right to sleep. In another story, he sleeps so soundly after a day of ministry, falls asleep in a boat, and even a storm doesn't wake him. Remember where he calms the storm in the story? He's sleeping. The disciples are like, hey, wake up, wake up. We're in the middle of, this water, and there's a storm coming. And perhaps most importantly, he would challenge us. He would challenge us in ways that were contrary to the society he lived in and the society that we live in today. Then, as now, people are held in esteem because of their wealth and status. If you were rich, healthy, of high social rank, etc., in ancient times, it meant that God must have blessed you. And if you weren't those things, then God must not favor you. Must be a reason that you're not doing so hot. But here comes Jesus saying that what's important is how we treat the least among us. We see this again and again in his stories and in his ministry. In the parable of the prodigal son, for example, you're familiar with that. The one son wants his inheritance early, goes out, blows it all on poor choices and bad living. The other son is dutiful and stays with the father. But the emphasis in the parable of the prodigal son is not on the son who is obedient to his father, but rather the one who squandered his inheritance and comes home with his proverbial tail between his legs. And he's welcomed despite all that he's done. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, a man lays robbed, beaten, and left for dead on the side of the road. Two holy men walk by him. The two that you would think, well, they would help this guy, but they walk by him. But a Samaritan, a person hated by Jews in the time of Jesus, is the one who shows mercy. And the thing is also, we know nothing else about this victim, only that he was in need of care and kindness. That's all we ever know of him. And I think the point of that is it doesn't matter what he was, what his job was, what his skin color was, what his marital status was. He was a fellow human being in need. That's what was important. And showing mercy was what was important. A big one that, flies in the face, flies in the face of my outlook sometimes, flies in the face of our culture. Turn the other cheek and pray for our enemies. Flies in the face of so much of our national identity and pop culture. It's like, you do bad to me, I'm going to do tenfold to you. You come after us, we're coming after you. That's very challenging to do. What do you mean, turn the other cheek? What do you mean, pray for those people who hate you and persecute you? Even the golden rule, which is not unique to Jesus, but is also among his teachings. Treat others the way we want to be treated. So simple in theory, so challenging in practice. Jesus challenged people in other ways, but I'm going to save that for part of next week's sermon as we examine, kind of the Easter story and the other side of the tomb. We're still working our way toward the tomb, metaphorically speaking. Next week we'll talk about the other side of that. For the purposes of today, understanding what Jesus taught is hard enough in a traditional Christian church, let alone a Unitarian Universalist one. UUs have many different views of who Jesus was, from the anointed Son of God to a fully human Jewish reformer who presented a message of radical love and forgiveness. Regardless of your specific beliefs, there is value in, and certainly a degree of wrestling with Jesus' teachings. They are not for the faint of heart. So as we make our way through Holy Week, I'd like to challenge you to reflect on these things and to ask yourself at least once this week, or more often if you so wish, what would Jesus really do? May it be so. Closing song is number 344. Close our service with the words of David Rankin. Palm Sunday is found whenever we are serving a noble and unpopular cause with selfless devotion, holding to the ideals of truth and justice. Whenever we are seeking to uplift the fallen, to comfort the brokenhearted, to strengthen and encourage the weak and hopeless. Whenever we are working bravely and persistently in the face of abuse and criticism, to establish more equitable relations in the world. Whenever we are sacrificing our lives in behalf of what we believe to be the service of love for all humanity. That is Palm Sunday. I invite you to join me in the words as we extinguish the chalice. The flame is extinguished, not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or the love we share in hope.